Well, good afternoon and welcome to Live Impact News right here on 13 News Now Plus. Now, you are likely aware of the fact that it is 2 o'clock p.m. and not our usual start time at 1 o'clock p.m. If you were with us yesterday for our show, you know that we have been experiencing some technical audio issues to begin this week. We feel like we've gotten them fixed over the course of the last hour, hence why we are on late. We appreciate anyone who has waited and is still tuning in with us now at 2 o'clock p.m. And the good thing is, with only an hour of show but a full day of coverage, we are going to squeeze a lot of content into the next hour. It's going to be fast-paced, and it all begins with the People's producer, Nia Campbell, who joins us, as always, in the studio. Nia, can we fit everything we've got into an hour here?
Yes, we got it.
Always confidence from Nia Campbell, and it starts actually with a very special guest here in the studio. Dr. Casey Myers from Virginia Tech joins us to talk a little bit about some current events, some headlines that are going on right now in the United States. Dr. Myers, thanks so much for rejoining us here on Live Impact News. How's everything going with you this week?
Going well. Thank you for having me.
Of course. And at the top of the list for sort of headlines here in the United States is everything happening at airports across the country. You have a unique confluence of events. Obviously, the funding lapse for the Department of Homeland Security has led to TSA workers not getting paid, which in turn has led to many calling out. That has resulted in Donald Trump sending ICE officers to various airports throughout the country to try and fill in some of the gaps, reportedly, of that TSA work. All of this comes as the spring times arrive. Spring break is here. It is a heavy travel period. And of course, there are energy concerns when it comes to the war in Iran and how those could impact air travel. You wrap all of that in with a tragedy at LaGuardia Airport yesterday, and it has just been a really, really tumultuous time for airports here across the country. Let's start with ICE workers being sent to airports to sort of help mitigate some of the loss of TSA agents. When you hear news like that, with everything, with all of the context that goes into the role ICE agents have played in this country over the last 6 to 10 months, and now they're headed to airports to help supplement TSA work, what's just your first impression of that news?
Well, I'm not surprised by it. I think that one of the issues that you have in the TSA realm is that we see so many call outs and in some resignations over not being funded and not being paid. And if you look at that across the country, it's a pretty sizable percent. I saw a percentage earlier today reported out just under like 12%. But if you go to some airports and look at some of these high volume airports, it's several times that number that may not be at work. And so what that results in is these slower times, these slower processing times, people having to wait in long lines at the airport to make a flight. And so what ICE agents are brought in there to do, because they were funded a little bit differently over the summer in the big beautiful bill, and so they were brought in to kind of alleviate this. They're alleviating it in a very particular way. And so they're not TSA agents. They're not trained that way. So it is going to be a little bit different in terms of just what their role is there. Again, I don't know in the long term, it has not totally eradicated this wait time issue that's been going on. Now, the politics of it are significant because the politics have resulted in some people saying that they are, they're apprehensive with all the ICE agents around. There's been criticism around ICE writ large. And there's also this political issue of masking. So they're unmasked at the airport, which kind of brings back this conversation that's been going on around ICE reform. So it's a political statement, but it's also, there's a practical side to it, just given the fact that travel has slowed down so much.
And there seems to be, there's an irony baked in where the reason the DHS is not funded right now is because of demands that Democrats have made when it comes to how ICE polices and how ICE carries out their operations. Like you said, face masks, body cameras, things of that nature. And now they're being brought in to supplement the holes that have been left by that lack of funding in DHS. When you see this sort of closed loop system, is there anything that says about the times we're living in? This just sort of bizarre, almost whack-a-mole situation that has arisen when it comes to DHS and ultimately air travel.
Well, I think it's an interesting political time. I think that what you're seeing is the ripple effects of politics and political issues, shutdowns becoming more common as they become political leverage to get reforms. In this case, ICE reforms, but other reforms as well. I think that the other thing that you're seeing here is, I think, a larger conversation around how government works. Government is designed to work in a particular way where you're funded. TSA agents, they're trained in a different way than ICE agents. They do fundamentally sort of different jobs. And so one of the things is that, is this replacement really an alleviation, or is this something that complicates matters further? And those experiences for travelers, I think, is something that has created a high level of frustration. Interestingly enough, though, on the DHS funding side, and we saw this in the last shutdown, when these funding and services kind of cease to exist and we start seeing the ripple effect to everyday travelers, to people just trying to use government services, that oftentimes creates a political inflection point that then kind of pushes a resolution forward. A lot of times in the beginning of these shutdowns is very abstract, like how is this really going to impact people? But as these services diminish, that we really do see that impacting the day-to-day lives of regular citizens.
And, to your point, we have seen reporting this morning that Congress is working towards a solution that would fund TSA workers and without funding necessarily some of the enforcement and removal operations that we have seen from ICE. So, as you said, this situation may be compelling elected officials to go and try and get this done, creating those elevated stakes to go ahead and find that funding. You mentioned TSA and what those workers do every day, and how other officers going into airports are not necessarily trained in the same way. Are you able to sort of further illuminate what TSA workers do that can't be easily replaced? I mean, there are so many specifics to their jobs that they train for. I mean, how difficult is it to step in as an untrained airport worker and keep things running smoothly in what at times can be a very chaotic environment?
Well, it's just my impression, but I think that one of the biggest challenges would be, the nature of the TSA agent is that they're outward facing with customers going into airports and having flights. And my understanding is that the ICE agents are brought in to do a limited job, really around security. But again, these are different jobs altogether. And they're also with the TSA agents. I mean, again, those processing times becoming longer and longer and longer as these wait times. There's the ripple effect about showing up to your flight on time, and so there's a real impact there for the traveler. And again, there's a growing frustration, I think, amongst federal workers, particularly now we see with the DHS, where they're going weeks without pay. Obviously, there's a personal impact on them and their families that way, and having missed checks and missed pay. And so, again, I think there's a growing frustration amongst them, is that they feel like they're kind of caught in this political kind of tension between Republicans and Democrats in Congress, and they end up being kind of, government workers in general become kind of the sort of the people that are the most affected, but may not actually be involved in the actual controversy. So this, as you mentioned, the DHS issue is really about ICE and are really about ICE reforms, not about TSA or any of the other numerous workers that work in the DHS.
Right, and it's TSA that continues to bear so much of the consequences of this shutdown. TSA workers used as a political pawn here more frequently than I can remember. Is that how you see it as well? In that obviously they're now just kind of being, their suffering is something that can be used as a political tool, and that has become a part of this mechanism of Congress as they try to. Everyone tries to gain an advantage in getting their legislation passed and their prerogatives through.
I certainly think there's a sentiment within the federal workforce that they feel like oftentimes they are bearing the brunt of these political issues within Congress, particularly around shutdowns. And the other thing is that the appetite for shutdowns has grown amongst politicians. And so we had shutdown in the 90s that was quite long. And then there seemed to be just sort of a political disinclination to use that as a tool for leverage. And now we're seeing that used more frequently because in a system like we have, where we have these razor thin majorities in Congress, and you have to have 60 votes to get budgets passed and things like that. The shutdowns become the kind of the tool of those who are in the minority party to get leverage, and it's being used by Republicans and Democrats. Again, it seems to also not have had the same kind of shock value that it had when we first kind of saw these shutdowns used as a political leverage that we saw in the 90s and in some of the early 2000s. Now this seems more commonplace, and I think those in the federal service do feel disproportionately affected, and oftentimes, there are dire personal consequences when you don't have paychecks, you don't have income, and yet many of these workers are required to go to work and work without pay, and of course they get back pay later. But again, that is a difficult challenge, and there's, I think, a growing frustration amongst them. And again, also on essential services where you have people that need to utilize government services, they have to travel. We're going into a high travel month, and we'll be going into more high travel months as we get into the summer. The impact of that is significant, and the impact on the everyday traveler is significant. So I think that there is a quite a frustration amongst those who are working in this kind of political environment where it seems that this has become just a normalized political reality.
And we talk about how the populace views these government shutdowns and how the shock value has kind of lessened since maybe the 90s or the early 2000s. And when I try to sort of just observe and examine why that might be, obviously it's become normalized. Anytime you have more of something, it's sort of easier to stomach, I suppose, in theory. I also wonder if perhaps there's a general numbness to the populace based on some of the sort of elevated nastiness that we've seen in politics over the last 8 to 12 years or so, and maybe even stretching a little bit beyond. And then maybe a part of me wonders if perhaps you have a populace that is maybe more educated than ever, and so they understand that this is simply a mechanism of negotiation, and they're better able to sort of, separate and understand why certain things are happening based on their own political inclinations. I'm just kind of throwing stuff at the wall and seeing if it sticks. Do you see an underlying reason for why people are more willing to accept a government shutdown here in 2026?
I think it's a combination of all the things that you mentioned. Prior to the 1980s, this was not a political reality. There were not government shutdowns that occurred, and so as it became a political reality and became a kind of a realization, particularly in the last 2 to 3 years, we're seeing kind of this normalization of it as a political tool. And that may be more accepted by the public because of the polarization that we see within society. It may be accepted by the public just because they're desensitized to it. I think there is a certain question, though, politically speaking, has always been a shutdown is won and lost. A party pays a price because it's who's at fault, who calls the shutdown. Is this a Republican shutdown or is this a Democratic shutdown? And I don't know that that's necessarily the case anymore because the political consequence of it doesn't seem to have resulted in a change in the behavior. So again, I don't know that desensitization to it really leads to one group kind of paying a political price for it. And as a result, I think you're going to see more of this continue in the future.
Yeah, and as we've seen, it'll be those TSA workers and other federal workers that kind of end up really, truly suffering when it comes to their actual bank accounts and livelihoods. Last question I'll ask you. We're actually watching on our board of live feeds as Markwayne Mullin is confirmed here by President Trump and sort of introduced as the next secretary of the DHS. Is that something that you think could provide a meaningful difference into finding some solutions to this issue?
Well, I certainly think that this is all just sort of coming together. All of these issues are coming together seemingly in one day. We also hear that there may be a resolution or an agreement in the Senate today as well on this DHS funding. Well, that remains to be seen. But certainly leadership has something to do with kind of these ongoing discussions, particularly around ICE reforms. And I think that this is going to be potentially, we may be at the end of this particular issue. But again, I don't think that it's going to be going away anytime soon. I think that this is going to continue to be a protracted and polarizing issue, particularly in a midterm election here.
Yeah, it certainly seems that way. Dr. Myers, we can't tell you how much we appreciate you kind of coming in and giving us some context and some insight. Is there anything else you want to add before we let you go?
I think we covered it all. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Myers. That's Casey Myers from Virginia Tech coming in to help us sort out this issue a little bit today. And you heard he mentioned there in his last answer the confluence of events that we're experiencing right now in regards to air travel. And it's actually all playing out right in front of us on our live board that we have here in the studio. We are currently looking at 5 live feeds, 3 of them directly related to what we've been talking about. President Donald Trump is confirming Marquayne Mullen here. Okay, you can see right here we've got President Donald Trump confirming Marquayne Mullen. We've got the National Transportation Safety Board speaking about that crash at LaGuardia that took the lives of 2 pilots. And then we have a press conference from GOP politicians about TSA funding. And then House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries is speaking as well. I'd say there's a great chance that he's talking about these issues. I think with that crash happening at LaGuardia yesterday, I think we're going to listen into the National Transportation Safety Board, see if we can get more information as to why that airplane crashed into that fire truck on the runway. A shocking video to see that we aired yesterday in our shows, and a tragic outcome with 2 pilots passing away. Naya, are we ready to pull that up? Yep, Naya's got it ready to go. Let's go live out to the NTSB right now.
In 33 seconds, the flight crew set the flaps to 45 degrees. At 1 minute and 26 seconds, an electronic 1,000 call-out occurred from the enhanced ground proximity warning system, indicating that the airplane was 1,000 feet above the ground. At 1 minute and 12 seconds, the flight crew confirmed that the landing checklist was complete. At 1 minute and 3 seconds, an airport vehicle made a radio transmission to the tower, but that transmission was stepped on by another radio transmission, and the source of who made that transmission has yet to be identified. At 54 seconds, the flight crew acknowledged that the airplane was 500 feet above the ground and on a stable approach. At 40 seconds, the LaGuardia Tower asked which vehicle needed to cross a runway. At 28 seconds, Truck 1 made a radio transmission to the tower. At 26 seconds, the tower acknowledged that radio transmission. At 25 seconds, Truck 1 requested to cross runway 4 at taxiway Delta. At 20 seconds, the tower cleared Truck 1 and company to cross runway 4 at taxiway Delta. At 19 seconds, an electronic 100 enhanced ground proximity warning system callout occurred. At 17 seconds, Truck 1 read back the runway crossing clearance. At 14 seconds, an electronic 50 callout. At 12 seconds, an electronic 30 callout. And at that same time, the tower instructed a Frontier Airlines flight to hold position. At 11 seconds, an electronic 20 call-out occurred, and at 10 seconds, an electronic 10 call-out occurred. At 9 seconds, the tower instructed Truck 1 to stop. At 8 seconds, there was a sound consistent with the airplane's landing gear touching down on the runway. At 6 seconds, there was a pilot transfer of controls from one pilot to the other. And at 4 seconds, the tower again instructed Truck 1 to stop. At 0 seconds, the recording ended. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman.
Mr. Bracy had mentioned that 6 seconds before the end of the recording, the pilot transferred controls. We do know that the first officer was flying and transferred control to the captain. With respect to aircraft rescue and firefighting operations, we will be developing a timeline of events. We do know that they were responding to a United Airlines flight 2384 at the gate, which had 2 aborted takeoffs, and the ARF, or the Aircraft Rescue and Firefighters, had received information that there were fumes or a smoke or some sort of smell in the cabin, so they were en route to address that. Truck 1, which Mr. Brazy had mentioned, had collided with the aircraft. We do know that there were other vehicles behind Truck 1, which did not begin to cross the runway. We have seen varying information about how many vehicles, so we need to verify that information, and we'll provide it at a later time. Truck 1, however, did not have a transponder. With respect to air traffic control, we have seen different information about how many certified professional controllers were in the facility. And we need to verify that starting with interviews this afternoon. We'll begin to interview the local controller at 4 o'clock this afternoon. We do have logs, but there's also conflicting information, including dates and times on the logs. So now we have to go through that and rectify some of those inconsistencies. We do, however, know that there were 2 people in the cab, 2 people in the tower cab at the time of collision: the local controller and the controller in charge. Again, local controller and controller in charge. For those who may be watching and aren't familiar with aviation, the local controller manages active runways and the immediate airspace surrounding the airport. That local controller had signed on at 10:45, and the shift would have ended at 6:45 a.m. That doesn't mean that he was in position at 10:45, but that he had just signed in at 10:45 p.m. The controller in charge is responsible for safety of operations, all safety of operations. He had clocked in or signed in at 10:30 p.m. And that shift would have ended at 6:30 a.m. Again, that was signing in at 10:30 p.m. The controller in charge was also doing the duties of the clearance delivery position. The clearance delivery controller provides pilots with their departure clearance. It is not clear who was conducting the duties of the ground controller. We have conflicting information. We have some information saying it was the controller in charge. We have some information saying it was the local controller. The ground controller duties are that they manage all aircraft and vehicle movements on the taxiways, and that generally excludes active runways. So these 2 positions were combined into 2 positions. And what we do know is that that is in the standard operating procedures for LaGuardia. It's for the midnight shift. It's also common practice across the national airspace, where you would have 2 controllers in the tower cab during the midnight shift. The midnight shift, as a reminder, is one that we have many times at the NTSB raised concerns about with respect to fatigue. Again, I do not know. I have no indication that was a factor here, but it is a shift that we have been focused on in past investigations. Now, we also know, as I had mentioned yesterday, that LaGuardia has ASDX. ASDX is a runway safety system which allows air traffic controllers to track surface movement of aircraft and vehicles. Yesterday I mentioned that we requested from FAA the ASD replay of the event. That is a replay of the display of information that would have been available in the tower cab. We also asked the tech center for the analysis of ASD. Their analysis shows that the ASDX system did not alert. The analysis, and I'm going to quote the analysis here. I will repeat it a second time. ASDX did not generate an alert due to the close proximity of vehicles merging and unmerging near the runway, resulting in the inability to create a track of high confidence. Again, the analysis is, quote, ASDX did not generate an alert due to the close proximity of vehicles merging and unmerging near the runway, resulting in the inability to create a track of high confidence. Now, I saw the replay, and there were 2 targets, so radar, because there's no transponder, you have radar. So 2 targets with radar returns on taxiway Delta. What it looks like on a replay are 2 blobs on taxiway Delta. We also don't see any of them go in front of the plane on the runway. We do also know from the replay that the runway status lights were functioning according to the replay, but we still have to verify that with tech ops from the FAA. Now, I do want to address one thing, which is reports of distraction. I have seen a number of reports from press about distraction, whether there was distraction among controllers. Look, I would caution pointing fingers at controllers and saying distraction was involved. This is a heavy workload environment. You had a United Airlines flight. We still have to determine what happened at shift change, which was around 10:30. We have to determine who else was in the tower and the facility and available at the time. We know that controller was still on duty for several minutes afterwards. Normally, they would be relieved. We have questions about that. Was anybody available to relieve that controller? We don't know that yet. We also have questions about what else was occurring, what other traffic they were dealing with at the time. So one thing I will close with before I take questions is we rarely, if ever, investigate a major accident where it was one failure. Our aviation system is incredibly safe because there are multiple layers of defense built in to prevent an accident. So when something goes wrong, that means many, many things went wrong. And so here, that's why we're here. We're here to prevent this from reoccurring, prevent this from happening again. And that's going to take some time. So with that, I will take questions. I ask that you raise your hand, state your name and your affiliation.
Given the fact that combining controller positions has been a factor in previous incidents that you've investigated, including the DCA airport, what would you say now that you know the positions were combined in the control tower path on Sunday night? Is that a safe practice? And does it make you upset that the positions were combined?
So there's a little bit of a difference in the question is on combining positions, because we saw the combining of positions in the mid-air collision that occurred near Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport about a year ago. Our understanding right now, and again this is preliminary and subject to change, our understanding is that in the DCA midair, there were procedures followed, a list like traffic volume, staffing available, training, workload that was considered in order to combine positions like the helicopter position and the local control position in DCA. In this situation for the midnight shift, it is standard operating procedure that they only have 2 on duty, and those 2 perform the duties of other controllers. That is our understanding right now. However, we're going to further dig into that as part of our investigation. Certainly, I can tell you that our air traffic control team has stated this is a problem, that this is a concern for them for years, that they have had this concern for quite a long time. I can understand it's a concern, especially if there's a heavy workload.
SDX did not work, and say that ASDF should be at more airports and it could prevent collisions? How upset does it make you that it's clear that it did not work in this scenario?
Well, the question is, how upset does it make me that ASDX didn't work? Because we've repeatedly recommended that ASDX work. Well, in order for ASDX to work well, you have to know where ground vehicles and aircraft are. So in this case, that vehicle did not have a transponder. And it would have been helpful when you have a radar radar target. It does not provide you with the information that you need like it would for an aircraft as a controller. Yes.
Jackson Brosco with Global News Canada. Is there any indication from the voice or data reporters that the pilots saw the fire or where they were on the runway?
Is there any indication from the CVR that the pilots saw the fire truck on the runway? I don't have information at this time on that. However, we are doing further analysis on our cockpit voice recorder. We have a group that we have formed that will analyze the CVR. And part of when they analyze is they will talk in the group about what they're hearing, what they've heard, any sort of background noises, and we'll provide a transcript, and then we'll release that publicly, so we'll know more then.
Chair Hamidi, Andrew Siff from NBC 4 New York, WNBC TV. With regard to the midnight shift, is it literally a midnight shift that you've expressed concerns about in the past, or is it sort of that later shift when there's typically less traffic at an airport? The reason I ask it is around this time, late at night on a Sunday night at LaGuardia, there's still lots of arrivals. To that degree, does that raise questions about the protocol and staffing here at this airport?
Well, so the question is about the shift, and are we just concerned about that shift in the past, or would there be other shifts? And does it make sense to have two controllers in the cab with such a busy airport, and this be sort of standard operating procedures and common practice across the national airspace? I think I restated it accurately and have now forgotten what you asked me. But on your standard operating procedure, on the standard operating procedures, look, LaGuardia is 900 flights, I believe, per day. That's pretty substantial. It's not the same as other airspace or other airports across the national airspace. That's certainly something we will look at as part of this investigation. How that would that make sense? You know, why would that make sense at LaGuardia? We will. That is part of our analysis in this investigation. And what was the other one?
Well,
so on the mid shift, we have identified the mid shift generally as concern in other investigations, largely due to fatigue, because it spans that time frame at your circadian low during the day when you're most fatigued.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
We're talking about biggest airports. So Secretary Duffy said that it's well staffed. When I hear you speak about the great responsibility that these agents are having in the towers, I'm trying to think, do they know that the other person is doing the other responsibility? Is there a moment that they will confuse as to who is doing what, since they're doing more than one responsibility at a time? Do we know both were trying to help the same emergencies, whether it was the fumes or the runway?
The question was, could there potentially be confusion among the two controllers of who's having what discussion, and could it be that they were both having the same communications, or different communications, or conflicting information communications, since they're doing more than one job? I can't answer that right now, because that's something we have to investigate as part of this accident scenario. Those are the exact types of questions that we'll ask when we interview the controllers, both the two that were in the cab at the time and the other controllers that may have been on duty, either, and include previously or after that. One thing I want to do is come back to something that Pete asked about, which is controllers and the information they should have, and ASDX and our past recommendations. Controllers should have all the information and the tools to do their job. all the information they need. We've recommended ASDX, but you have to have information on the ground movements, or, whether that's aircraft or vehicles moving on the airport, in taxiways, on runways. They should have all the information. This is 2026. The Secretary talks about upgrading our air traffic control system. We have an old air traffic control system. This is why he talks about that. We need to upgrade, but we also need to improve safety across the air. It's not just air traffic control, it's safety all around. Yes?
Chairperson, Matt Chilson from Weekday. I'm wondering, is it common for ground vehicles to have transponders? And second, what does it mean that a radio transmission was stepped on?
Okay. With respect to transponders, the question is it common for ground vehicles to have transponders? I don't have the latest figures on that. I would suggest speaking with the Federal Aviation Administration on that, or you can contact Eric and we'll get back to you on numbers. Should they? That's something we'll determine as part of our investigation. I will tell you that not having a recommendation, yeah, they should. Even though we don't have a recommendation, air traffic controllers should know what's in, before them, whether it's on airport surface or in the airspace. They should have that information to ensure safety. Now, that's not an NTSB recommendation, so I want to be clear. But it could be. We don't know. And your other question on stepped on, the communication was stepped on, it means it may have been a mic key or some sort of interference or interruption of the transmission.
Why would that be?
Because somebody else on the other, why would that be significant? He was asking the question on what does stepped on mean with respect to communications. That would be significant because that would mean that somebody may not hear the other part of that communication. Yes, sir? No. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, if I may, thank you. Does the data recorder give any indication that the pilots made any attempt at evasive action?
And you're probably asking about the flight data recorder. We don't have information, the download from the flight data recorder yet. That group, I believe, is getting together today to start going through the data. We do have good data, but they're going to start looking at it today, and we'll provide further information down the line. You and then you.
Similar to that question, Dave Schwicker, New York Times. Was there any evidence that the truck tried to swerve or brake crossing one way?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Can you confirm the names of the pilots who died?
Can I confirm the names of the pilots who passed away? No, I would refer you to the New York City Chief Medical Examiner. We don't confirm any fatalities, injuries, or names. And your other question?
The truck, did it turn and brake any evidence?
With respect to the truck, did the truck turn and brake? I've probably seen the same CCTV video that you have. We have to do some further investigation on that, including interviews of both firefighters that were on board. And right here. The question is, do we know if the two firefighters in the firefighting vehicle heard the directive to stop? We don't know that yet. We need to do interviews of those two firefighters. David.
Dave Sherman from Reuters. In 2023, you held a forum on runway incursions and near misses. And as a result, the FAA started rolling out this runway incursion device, memory management controllers. Do you know if that was present here or any other additional technology to help? And as part of that, if ADSB in and out have been mandated, do you think remote the fire truck, transponder, and the plane could that have prevented this?
The first question on other technology that would have been available to alert to the controllers, I don't have that to provide at this time. Our investigators have to begin their analysis. Again, this is our first full day on scene, and we're not even through the day, but we will have more information on what types of technology have been available to them. The second question is on whether ADSB in and out would have helped prevent this. I would just caution, and I've heard the discussion on ADSB in and out with respect to this particular collision. It happened very quickly. And We need to match up times. We need to look at visibility with respect to the airplane coming in and look at the movement and visibility of those in the truck. So we can't say at this time whether that would have made a difference or not.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Can I ask one question about the transponder?
One question.
Any indication as to why Truck 1 did not have a transponder when other trucks did in that caravan?
And let me clarify. The question is on transponder on that truck. We have no indication there were transponders on any of the trucks. But there are transponders on other trucks at other airports, across the nation. In this case, they did not have transponders.
Any indication as to why?
No. Part of the investigation. Thank you so much.
Okay, Jennifer Homendy and the NTSB there giving quite an update on that tragic crash at LaGuardia Airport yesterday. An Air Canada commercial airline colliding with a fire truck on the runway. The airplane itself going around 100 miles an hour, potentially more. 2 pilots died, and of course that footage that we've been playing for you, just shocking to see the front of that airplane just kind of completely torn apart there. So an update from the NTSB, and it certainly seems as though that won't be the last one, as they are currently looking into this this horrible incident that occurred yesterday. Now what we're going to do here is we're going to take a brief commercial break, and when we get back, as you saw before, plenty of events still to get to, but first, a break. All right, welcome back to Live Impact News, today's abbreviated version. We appreciate everybody's patience today. We're actually going to send it out to the Oval Office, where President Donald Trump just swore in Markwayne Mullin as the new Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. But now Trump is at the podium taking questions from the assembled press. Let's go out to Washington, D.C. and listen in.
Dead. Yeah.
Is there a new sense of a timeline? Do you want to get something done before the midterms?
Well, we'd like to see President Putin and President Zelensky sit down and make a deal. I think they're getting close, but I've been saying that for a while. I've settled 8 wars. All of them should have been more difficult than this one. This should have been the easiest one, but these are 2 people that truly hate each other. You'll find out that hatred is not good for making these are people that they don't like each other very much. Yeah.
I know you said there's a bunch of people from the administration who are negotiating with Iran. There's been reports that the vice president is leading those negotiations. Is that true?
Well, he's involved in them. JD is involved, and Marco's involved, and Jared Kushner's involved, very smart guy, and Steve Witkoff, smart guy, is involved. And I'm involved. I'm involved. Why? Well, I'm going to be so big. Oh, I don't want to talk about it. I'm the president of the United States, Tom, and I'm not going to talk about it. It's beneath me to talk about saving millions of lives, because that's what you're talking about. You're talking about saving millions of lives. If Iran had a nuclear weapon, they would have used it. And I didn't end the horrible Barack Hussein Obama Iran nuclear deal in my first administration. They would have had a nuclear weapon 3 or 4 years ago. They would have used it. I would have gotten the chance probably to be president. Who knows what would have been so devastating. And if we didn't send those beautiful B-2 bombers, they took them off my desk. They were right there. I don't know why. But if we didn't have those beautiful, the B-2 hit, which was so, we obliterated, despite CNN. CNN said, well, maybe the word obliteration said, no, we obliterated it. Just obliterated their nuclear potential. You would have had them having, 2 weeks after that, had we not made the attack, they would have had a nuclear weapon. They would have absolutely, and they would have used it on the entire Middle East, including Israel. And you know why you see that? Because unexpectedly, when this war broke out, unexpectedly, they started sending missiles to UAE, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Bahrain, and elsewhere. Nobody thought they were going to. Were you equally surprised by that, Pete? Pete, do you want to give about a 3-minute statement on how we're doing in this, as I call it, militarization? People don't like me using the word war, but so I won't. But the Democrat war. How about a little statement? I think he's done a very good job. Do we agree he did a good job, Mark? Can we take some of your time?
Well, thank you, Mr. President. You're spot on. Never in history has a military. Iran had a modern military, a modern navy, modern air force, modern air defenses, leadership, massive. Never has a modern military been so rapidly and historically obliterated, defeated from day one with overwhelming firepower. The air campaign that we've conducted, that Israel's conducted alongside us, was one for history books, truly. And it's because we have a president of the United States that when he sees war fighters out to fight, he unties their hands to actually go out and close with and destroy the enemy as viciously as possible from moment one. And that's why we see ourselves as part of this negotiation as well. We negotiate with bombs. You have a choice as we loiter over top of Tehran, as the president talked about your future. The president has made it clear that you will not have a nuclear weapon. The War Department agrees. Our job is to ensure that. And so we're keeping our hand on that throttle as long as it's hard as is necessary to ensure the interests of the United States of America are achieved on that battlefield. This is not Iraq and Afghanistan. It's not a president who's interested in vague end states. He's been very clear about what we need to accomplish, creating the conditions for them never to have a capability, and that's exactly what we're doing in historic fashion. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Appreciate it. You know, the only two people that were quite disappointed, I don't want to say this, but I have to. I said, Pete and General Raisin Kane, I think this will be settled very soon. Here they go. Oh, that's too bad. Pete didn't want it to be settled. It's these guys are doing a great job. That's a good attitude, though, Tom, right? They were not interested in settlement. They're interested in just winning this thing. Yeah, please.
Mr. President, can you, just taking things locally, hopefully not doing international affairs for a second, do you support the construction of the Second Avenue subway in New York City, and will your administration work?
Far out, Chris. You know, the Second Avenue subway has been under construction for, you're a young guy, is longer than you are old, okay? Huh? That's been under construction. I haven't heard about the Second Avenue subway in 20 years. What the hell kind of a question is that? Yes, you got to get it finished. They spent trillions of dollars practically. No, they spent money on that. than on anything, I think, in the history of our city, in New York City, and it's been under construction for a long time. It's very sad, actually. The only thing maybe worse was Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, his train, I call it his train wreck, because it's a wreck. That's been years. It's literally 30 times over budget. Nobody's ever seen anything like it. And it doesn't go to San Francisco and Los Angeles like it was supposed to. They decided to cut it way short because there was no way they could fit it. But it's one of the worst. I've never seen anything like it. Other than the worst, the Federal Reserve building for almost $4 billion, little building that's going to cost a renovation for $1 billion, headed by our highly incompetent head of the Federal Reserve. Yeah, please.
Mr. President, would you be hoping to see the Senate pursue Reconciliation 2.0 to fund ICE and pass the American
Well,
Act?
we'll see about reconciliation. We're certainly talking about reconciliation, I think, Mark Wayne, right? Do you want to talk about that for a second? Now that he's working, we can get him to do this.
Thank you. Lindsey Graham, the chairman where the reconciliation will funnel through, he is committed to making sure we get reconciliation through. If that is in some with funding ICE, possibly backfilling from the Way Beautiful bill, but also more importantly, the Save American Act. There's a framework that we can do through reconciliation for it, put some of the policies that cost money in, because nothing more important than the Save American Act. I mean, that's what the American people want. There's 80% of the population say they want only Americans voting, citizens that are registered to vote, citizens that have done it the right way, and I believe everybody wants an election integrity. So, fortunately, Lindsey Graham said through reconciliation, he's willing to put the framework out for that.
And I think that was said so beautifully, so concisely, so well, your father, that we should let him have the last word, and that was it, that last word. Did he do a good job? Are you impressed with your father?
Never been more impressed by anybody in my life.
How about me? Don't answer. Don't answer. Don't answer. No, you like your father better, okay? Come here, look at this guy. Come here. This guy, don't wrestle him. We'll steal over here.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right. I want to thank the family, because without the family, he's not here. You know, he's a different person. And that was especially for Mom, who looks like she's about 22 years old. I don't know. I see the years, but she looks very young. But it's a great couple. Congratulations to you both. Thank you. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. Thanks.
Okay, things finishing up at the Oval Office there. Mark Wayne Mullen officially sworn in as the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, a department that is going through a lot right now, as we talked about earlier in the stream, and then, of course, some questions and answers from President Trump. What we're going to do now is go to a recording of House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, who spoke earlier today, and looks as though it was on a similar topic that we've been talking about throughout this show, based on what we can see on this home screen right here. Pay TSA, and it looks like there's some healthcare topics coming up as well. So let's go live out to Washington, D.C. and listen to Hakeem Jeffries.
Good afternoon, everyone. House Democrats continue to focus on making life better for the American people, to drive down the high cost of living, to fix our broken healthcare system, to make sure that immigration in this country is fair, just, and humane, to ensure that TSA agents are paid as opposed to being forced to work without pay, so that Republicans can continue to prevent ICE from being reined in. And of course, we're going to continue to work on ending this reckless war of choice in Iran, where Donald Trump and Republicans are spending billions of dollars to drop bombs in the Middle East, but won't spend a dime to extend the Affordable Care Act tax credits in order to ensure that more than 20 million Americans are able to afford to go see a doctor when they need one, We're fighting for health care, not warfare. And Republicans are doing the exact opposite. Questions?
Have you been read in on the deal that's formulating out of the Senate side, particularly when it comes to Senator Schumer and others keeping you in on this? And are you open to the framework that's being offered?
I have not spoken to Leader Schumer this week, but do expect to talk to him later on today, now that we're back in session. And here's the thing. We've been very clear. ICE should be compelled to conduct itself like every other law enforcement agency in the country and not expend billions of dollars in taxpayer money to brutalize and in some cases kill American citizens, as was tragically the situation with Renee Nicole Good and Alex Freddie. ICE should be violently targeting law-abiding immigrant families, making our communities less safe, not more. And at the same period of time, the problem is that Republicans have decided that they'd rather force TSA agents to work without pay, inconvenience millions of Americans all across the country, and create chaos at airports, rather than enact into law common sense things like requiring ICE agents to secure judicial warrants before they can break into the homes of the American people and rip them out of their beds in the middle of the night. And so we'll evaluate in good faith whatever is presented, but it's got to be consistent if it's going to deal with ICE with the types of changes that are bold, meaningful, and dramatic.
If I can follow up, I mean, the last shutdown fight, you had some concerns that House Democrats were basically out of the conversation. Is this falling into that same arena?
No, that has not been the case.
And further on these negotiations, if the deal is what we were reporting, which is that the deal would fund all of DHS except for ICE's law enforcement capacity, is that a win for Democrats?
Well, we have to take at what the definition of ICE's law enforcement capacity is, what they're allowed to do in terms of funding and not do, and what type of changes are in the legislation that is presented. When we've been very clear from the beginning, ICE needs to be brought under control. We cannot have a situation where taxpayer dollars are being used to brutalize and kill American citizens. It's not a complicated proposition that we've been fighting hard to achieve. In a country where the American people want immigration enforcement to be fair, just, and humane, we're going to continue to make sure that there are secure borders. But we do have a broken immigration system, and we should fix it. Let's do it in a comprehensive and bipartisan way. But what this Trump administration has done, trying to jam these extreme mass deportation, violent policies down the throats of the American people, is unacceptable. And it's a non-sustainable thing at this point in time. Well, it's a question as to what is actually funded and what's not funded. Now, we have a discharge petition that is live right now, already north of 125 signatures or so, working to complete that process over the next few days. That would make sure that we pay TSA agents, that we fund the Coast Guard, that we fund FEMA, and that we fund cybersecurity professionals who are working hard to keep us safe. If we can't get to a resolution this week as it relates to the type of changes that are necessary to get ICE under control. Now, if it's that type of agreement, then of course there's going to be strong Democratic support. It's consistent with the legislation that Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro has already introduced and that we're working hard to force an up or down vote on the House floor. If it's something different, then it remains to be seen how House Democrats will react. We'll have to have a conference.
Okay, back here in the Live Impact News Studio for the last time today. An abbreviated show for us, but one that was incredibly busy. Another shout out to Dr. Casey Myers for joining us earlier today. That'll do it for Live Impact News on Tuesday. We hope to see everybody on Wednesday. We're getting all the technical issues solved, everybody. Thank you for your patience. We'll see you tomorrow.